Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. Do you know the difference between planning drawings and building regulation drawings? Do you know why builders can't price a project from planning drawings? Well, in this episode, I'm going to go into that in a lot more depth and help you understand the difference between the two, because it's actually really, really important. And it's so important that if you get it wrong, it can seriously affect your credibility with builders. And I say that from the concept of where I was now back in, 12, 15 years ago or so, when I was receiving planning drawings from property investors and they were wanting me to price their projects. And actually, from a builder's perspective, planning drawings are actually worthless. So much so that I don't ever send the planning drawings to my builders when they're pricing the project. And I'm going to explain more of that through this podcast. So let's start with planning drawings. I'll help you understand what those are first. They are concept drawings. That's the most important thing to understand here. They're concept drawings. They show compliance with the local and national planning regulations for the type of property that you want to create, be that a house, be that some flats, maybe an HMO or a mixed commercial residential, or maybe it's a conversion of an existing property, or it's an extension to an existing property. But all of these drawings show how the scheme actually complies with the local and national planning regulations. And one of the challenges with the planning regulations, although some of it is very, very prescriptive, some of it is actually open to interpretation, in some cases a little bit woolly. And of course, some of it is also driven by not so much policy that's written down, but driven by local authority planners being lobbied by their local constituents to reject schemes that are perceived as being alternative, different, out of keeping, that kind of thing. And it makes me chuckle sometimes, the kind of comments that the neighbours raise and the complaints they raise about these some of the schemes. And rightly so, they've got grounds to raise some complaints without any doubt. But they also have got some difficult. Sometimes what they actually raise complaints about is really just quite ludicrous, and they're almost wasting their time. But that nevertheless, locals and local authorities, the planning departments, can raise objections and will of course raise objections, and sometimes those objections can be dealt with, and of course sometimes they mean a more major replan. And often there's there will be reasons given for any rejection, and often they can be incorporated and the scheme can go ahead in a slightly different form. Key thing to pick up here, though, is that we're demonstrating compliance with the local authority regulations and the national planning regulations. So national regulations, for instance, have got some minimum space standards. There are minimum dimensions that you have to deliver if you are creating new residential units, to ensure that we're not delivering poor quality units. Whether you agree with those dimensions or not, then they're written in statute, so we have to comply with them. They're something that came in probably only 4 or 5 years ago or so, maybe not even that long ago. So prior to that, they were a little bit more localized, but now they are national. So we've got to demonstrate from our planning drawings that the units we're creating meet those minimum space standards. And then there's other things that we need to comply with as well. For instance, the local authorities will have some element of density. They will stipulate the density or how dense we can build out our units. For instance, tower blocks in the wrong place would be considered too dense, or even too many small units in the wrong place could be considered too dense for perhaps the road network, perhaps the parking, things like that. So, and some local authorities have actually got these guidelines written down. Others haven't, and it just comes down to the planning officers themselves. Clearly, we want to consider aesthetics. If we can't demonstrate that the building is correctly designed from an aesthetic perspective, then it may get rejected. I need to be careful here with what I say, because sometimes planners like to see a new building very much in keeping with the remainder of the street, but other times they're totally open to something very modern, very alternative being built, because they want to demonstrate that they want to show the evolution of the street and show, much like we've got some very, very ancient buildings, some listed buildings in some roads with more modern properties, and perhaps more modern that were 50s, 60s, 70s. A lot of planners are actually quite open to the fact that, well, we've got 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Why not have something that's much more modern, and of the 20s style? So there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but we've got to demonstrate how we've thought about it. And it could be that we borrow some features from some of the other properties, and we replicate some of those features, but we build to a slightly more modern standard using some more modern materials, for instance. So all of this information is put into the planning drawings that we submit from a planning perspective. Sometimes we obviously need to show how many units we're building, how many flats are we converting the big house into. Is there one flat per floor? Are there two flats? Are there some duplexes where there's two-story flats? Whatever the arrangement is, as well as meeting the space standards that we also need to demonstrate. We also need to show how it's being split up. We may be obliged to provide off-road parking. So we need to demonstrate how that works. We may be obliged to demonstrate how refuge arrangements work. Perhaps we have to have not just some bin storage areas, but actually space for the refuge lorry to actually get there. Perhaps, I've seen that with properties built, kind of back garden building. How do we manage that process? How do we manage access for fire prevention and things like that? So this is all concept. Planning drawings are all about the concept. What is our property going to look like? What are we actually going to provide? How do we demonstrate that it is compliant with the local authority planning regulations current at the time? So those are the planning drawings. Now, the other drawings that we're going to come across are building regulation drawings. Now, often these are primarily put together by the same architect that's done the planning application. There's likely to be other consultants involved in the building regulation drawings, most frequently a structural engineer, but there could be some other consultants involved as well, with providing detail to go on to the architect's drawings, or perhaps providing separate drawings for their element of the build. Now, the building regulation drawings are about demonstrating compliance with the building regulations. So what we're saying is planning drawings are the concept. This is what we are wanting to provide. The building regulation drawings demonstrate how we are going to build that unit or convert that property in a way that is safe to use. And the way we ensure it's safe to use is that we make it compliant with the building regulations. So, for instance, the building regulation drawings will have details about the structure. We don't want to be building properties that are going to fall down. So the building regulation drawings will have details of foundations on there, details of the walls, of the roof, of how we're going to hold things up. If we're converting a property, it may well have some details as to how we take down a load-bearing wall and put in a structural steel beam to hold up the floor and the remaining floors above. So those details are on the building regulation drawings. We also have to consider other elements of the building regulations. So the safety elements, as far as how do we stop people falling down the stairs? Well, we have balustrades. Well, that's fairly obvious, but we put that detail on the drawings to make sure that the builders build what we need and that it's compliant. And we have balconies and we have railings or glass around balconies. So we consider the safety element. We consider how we get occupants out in case of a fire. Maybe a fire escape or the main staircase. How do we make sure that that is fire protected? In some buildings, we need secondary fire escapes. Other buildings need sprinkler systems and fire alarms and things like that. So we have to consider all of that. All of that we need to tell to our builder, so that actually goes onto the drawings. If we're converting a property or creating multiple dwellings in the property, we need to consider how we stop the sound going through the walls and through the floors so that the people living upstairs and next door aren't disturbed by noise coming from one unit into another. We need to demonstrate that we're installing our services safely. Our electrics are going in safely and are compliant. Our gas installation is going in safely and compliant. So all of that information is given on the building regulation drawings. And so hopefully from that explanation, you can understand the difference between the two sets of drawings. The planning drawings are all about concept. The building regulations are all about compliance. And as a result, builders can't build from concept because they actually need the detail to know what they're building. And this is why sometimes if you show planning drawings to a builder and ask them to give you a price, they will struggle to give you the price. And if they do give you a price, it will always be called an estimate. And it's an estimate rather than a quotation because they actually haven't got any detail. And builders' core skills are building following the details on the building regulation drawings. Builders' core details are not interpreting planning drawings and working out what might be needed to be built. That is the core skill of architects, is initially planning, but then next stage along, actually putting together building regulation drawings and putting the detail onto the planning drawings to demonstrate how the property actually needs to be built out. And many consultants can give that similar kind of advice. Quantity surveyors particularly are experienced in looking at planning drawings and putting together budgets for projects based upon their experience, their expertise, their training, so that you know how much you need to pay for a property to make it a profitable scheme. But ultimately, they're relying on slightly different skills and knowledge and training than builders, and that's why builders really don't have any use for the concept drawings at all. And as I said at the start, I don't ever send builders the planning drawings. The only time they might have some drawings that could be considered planning drawings is where there's drawings that say that show as existing. So We may send the builders the existing drawings that are used at planning stage, but as far as the proposed drawings used at planning stage, they're no use to builders. We actually have our building regulation drawings that have got all of the details on so that the builder knows exactly how to build this property out. The builder is not guessing where we need structural steel. They're not guessing how deep the foundations have to go. They're not guessing how where we have the enclosed fire escape, and whether we need to put in a sprinkler system. They are pricing your project based upon the instructions that someone with different skills has been able to put down onto the drawings so that they have got all of the information they need. So don't ever send your builders the planning drawings, and if you do, you will find that builders will see you as a less credible client. Your inquiry could very easily just go straight in the bin, and could certainly, as a minimum, go on the bottom of the pile, because builders don't really want to be wasting their time on something like concept drawings when they've hopefully got other inquiries from clients that know what they're doing and are giving them the building regulation drawings. So that could be a reason why sometimes, some of you may have had difficulty getting builders to price, because perhaps that's what you've done, and builders are kind of thinking and saying to themselves, well, here's a client who doesn't seem to know what they're doing. I've got work coming in from clients that do seem to know what they're doing, so I'm going to price their work and go and do their project instead. To take this completely away from construction, let me just share an analogy that I use sometimes when I'm speaking to property investors, to help you understand the two sets of drawings. In many ways, if we turn this to a cooking analogy, the planning drawings, the concept drawings, are like a photograph of a chocolate cake in a book or in a magazine. If I gave everyone a photograph of a chocolate cake, most people would struggle to deliver the chocolate cake that looks like the picture we've got, because we haven't got the instructions, we haven't got the recipe. The instructions are what we would put on the building regulation drawings, and that's what our builders need. And most people, if given some instructions in the form of a recipe, in many cases without even the photograph, could actually make a really good effort at delivering a chocolate cake. I know not everyone could cook a cake from just the recipe, and that's exactly the same with building, of course. But what we do hope is that anyone with building skills can deliver building, and people that have got some skills and experience around cooking could take a recipe for most things and deliver a pretty good finished product, that would look reasonably close to the drawings. So planning drawings are the photograph of the chocolate cake. The building regulation drawings are the recipe, and it's the recipe that we actually need, the ingredients and the recipe that we actually need to be able to get builders to price our projects and ultimately deliver through on that project. Now, just a few things to be aware of whilst I'm talking about this subject. The first thing is that to point out that just because there are properties on the market that already have planning permission in place, it doesn't mean that it's actually a cost-effective scheme and that you can make money out of that project. And you will probably be well aware of projects or properties in your area that have been on the market for a good long time and with planning permission and are not selling. And the likelihood is that the scheme doesn't stack up. Good architects will actually consider the buildability of a scheme as part of the planning process, because there's no point in putting in a planning application if you fundamentally can't deliver on the scheme that you're designing. However, most architects won't actually drill down into the costings and consider whether the scheme is actually going to make money. That's not their core skill. That's what quantity surveyors do. And of course, a lot of architects aren't aware of the purchase price in the first place and holding cost, and they're not necessarily aware of your long-term plans with the scheme. So do be very careful that just because a property has got planning, it doesn't make it a viable scheme. And over the years, I've prepared budgets for a lot of property investors that have found schemes with planning, and ultimately we've stacked it all up and there is no deal to be done. So be very careful just buying a property with planning without getting the numbers, getting a quantity surveyor like myself to run the numbers for you and help you understand whether it is actually a profitable scheme. In many cases, in most cases, a scheme on the open market with planning probably doesn't stack up, because there's obviously a lot of developers out there who employ people to find schemes for them. And if these people are looking every day of the week, they're in touch with the agents, they're in touch with architects, they're looking at the planning portals and what have you. So if they have turned it down and it's on the open market, the likelihood is at face value it doesn't stack. That's not to say that it will never stack. It may be that you can negotiate slightly different terms with a vendor. Maybe the day you talk to the vendor, they're super motivated to get rid of it and suddenly prepared to drop the price, and you're the first one in the door. So it's not to say don't look at these properties, but go into them with the knowledge that as they're presented, they probably don't stack. So you've got to use your negotiation skills to turn these round into some kind of deal, because, as I say, unfortunately, there's a lot of schemes out there that can't be built out at a profit. There's also a number of schemes out there that really can't, they can't easily be delivered. And particularly be mindful of things like the minimum space standards. I've seen properties, I've seen schemes on the market where there's conversion of existing into flats or something like that. And when you actually look at the space standards, that they're right on the minimums, and they've fiddled the thickness of walls, or they fiddled something to prove that there's a scheme. And that's not to say that the architects have necessarily done the wrong thing here, because if an architect has been engaged by an owner of a property to produce some concept drawings to get planning and sell the building, it's down to you as the potential purchaser to do your own research. So do check that things can be built. I was asked to put some figures together for an investor who was wanting to build a block of flats. We looked at the block of flats from the drawings. It didn't look too difficult to build out. When we actually looked on Google and went into Street View, we could see that these block of flats were on quite a significant hill, requiring quite an expensive and complicated retaining wall on two sides to hold the whole thing, to hold back two sides of the road, as it were, because of the way this hill fitted in. And then when we looked a little bit deeper, we found that there was actually a bus stop in the way with a shelter and everything, exactly where the driveway went into the car parking area. And so there were just these other challenges. Now, there's no obligation to show any of these issues on the planning drawings. I've seen telegraph poles in the middle of sites, which are going to where that's got to be relocated. I've seen electrical substations right next door to buildings where there's a where you're going to build right next to the electric substation, which isn't a no, but it does affect the value. I saw one property which had planning permission. It was planning permission to build a house between two properties, and I said to the guys that came to me, we'd done a budget. It looked like it was going to stack up, and I said to these guys, there is something wrong here. This property is on the open market. No one's buying it. the planning's 2 years old, you need to go away and do some research. I would have a look and see what's underground here. They went to the water authority, they found that there was a huge sewer underground, and effectively, therefore, you couldn't actually develop the site. It had been left undeveloped as a result of a sewer underneath. So be very, very careful jumping in and buying properties with planning permission just because they've got planning permission. You do need to consider whether you can build out the whole scheme. So there we go. That's the reason. Well, that is the difference between planning drawings and building regulations drawings. It's the reason why builders can't price from planning drawings particularly or at all accurately. And it's also the reason why you need to be super cautious buying anything that has planning permission without taking some advice from a consultant like myself. You're welcome to get in touch with me that can help you understand what you're looking at, because sometimes these schemes are dressed up to be better than they actually are by owners of the land who just want to get rid of the land. So I hope that you can understand that you need to go forwards with care. And as I say, you're welcome to get in touch with me if there's anything I can help you with on that.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.